Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra,
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people.
associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked.
and sometimes what didn't,
You will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts.
And inspire you to do even greater things.
In this episode of the Software People Stories, we bring to you the story of a fellow PM Powerian, Ramakrishnan Sethuraman, or Ramki as he's known to all of us. Ramki has over 30 years of experience in IT with large corporates and as an entrepreneur. He started out with applying C on mainframes and is a firm believer in building strong foundations for systems. Ramki shares why he's enjoyed learning about and working with financial companies who he feels have been at the forefront of adopting technology to drive business. He's moved across various roles in his career and shares valuable lessons for entrepreneurs and then some career lessons as well. Listen on. Good afternoon, Ramki. It's wonderful to have you as a guest on the Software People Stories. I've certainly been looking forward to our conversation. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Chitra, and good afternoon to you as well. I look forward to this session, actually.
How would you like to introduce yourself to our listening audience, Ramki?
Okay, yeah, I think like a lot of our colleagues who have been in the IT world for a few decades. I've also been in the IT world for 3 decades now, and it's been a very exciting journey, and it's kind of I've been very fortunate to play pretty much every role you can kind of think of, including kind of starting my own business. So I would say it's been a very exciting journey so far, and my heart has always been in consulting, meeting with clients, coming up with new ideas, new solutions, creating stuff. So I think that's where I love what PM Power is doing, and I really look forward to an exciting journey now with PM Power.
Thank you. Where did this journey begin? How did you get interested in IT or software? How did you start down this road?
I actually did when I did my bachelor's, and that was way back in 84 to 88. I majored in electronics and communications engineering. So at that time, anything closer to computers was the hardware. So software, well, of course, was there. We just had some Unix computers, locked up in some lab, which was very exclusive. Of course, the big mainframes were still there, and again, very exclusive access. So my BE was all about electronics. Various kinds of electronic and communication technology was what we were focusing on. So the nearest thing to computers was actually studying about microprocessors, which was extremely interesting for me. But I still wasn't thinking about getting into the whole IT industry. But just as I was completing BE, IT was, I think, just starting to be the hot topic. So I was able to get into a master's at College of Engineering, Guindy, computer science. I really loved that course. And then out of campus, TCS picked me up, and that's where the IT journey started. So like everyone at that time, I started out as a programmer, and TCS, of course, known for mainframe work. A lot of people actually start with COBOL on mainframe, but I started with C on mainframe. It was again, TCS used to do a lot of maintenance projects, but and they were also a pioneer in doing from the scratch design build projects, and that too for in an on-site offshore model. So they've been pioneer, and I was fortunate enough to kind of start off in a development project like that. It was for a client in Sweden, and so those times completely different from today. Nobody had email. There used to be one computer in an office where people used to go and download emails, and that too, restricted to the project managers. So we used to have our own way of communicating. We used to have these data sets on mainframe. So we used to use a kind of a project data set and a private data set, float stuff there, and communicate with people who are in Sweden or even dispersed teams in India. I think it's been interesting times. That's how it kind of started with the technology world, Chitra.
Interesting, Ramki. In fact, I have 2 questions coming in my mind. So you talked about design build projects. And today, even though the concept of design thinking has been around for a while, one still finds that the typical mindset of an engineer is get into the how of a problem. So my first question to you is, when you said design build projects, what were some of the approaches that you used? Why would some of them be relevant or not today?
Okay. No, I think that sets me thinking already. So let me take that one first. So I think, see, like everyone, I think when we are at a particular stage in our career, we think a certain way, and then as we go, our thinking completely changes, right? So that's the same way it was with me. When I did my first design build project, I kind of fell in love with the hardcore technology, right? So as you rightly said, we don't really look at the what and the why aspects. We don't even know really about the client, what they are trying to do much. Typically, we're assigned a work and then we have to do a good job of that. So it's assigned a certain number of programs. So the thing I did really well at that time, I think, was, so whether it was C programming or the database side of it, I tried to make sure that I kind of apply myself completely there. I kind of completely fell in love with writing very complex programs. And I used to be the kind of, even in that project, those times I used to be called as the database gurus. DB2 was the mainframe database at that time. And I got into real intricate performance tuning aspects of it. Of course, I had a very good boss and was kind of very willing to coach me there. I was fortunate on that. My love at that time was just focus on doing a great job at what I was doing. That was very, very hardcore software technology oriented. I love doing that. But subsequently, as I kind of moved on to projects, various types of roles, so increasingly what I realized was you got to understand the client's business. The domain aspect came in very strongly, and that's where my first love of the financial services world also came in. Actually, I did a lot of projects for financial services clients, and I really got into understanding the client's business at that time. So whenever I meet with younger folks, town halls and informal chats, etc., I always tell developers also that you first do your job, what you're given exceedingly well, but you also try and understand the context. What are you building? I've kind of heard a lot of very good, interesting stories where some developers actually completely wowed visiting clients, right? So one particular story, a US client came down. I think it was from the retail industry, and one of my team's project members said something about this particular program does this, Mr. So and so, but this kind of tells me that you're not looking at this particular aspect of your business. Why is that? The client was completely bored with that question. He didn't realize a programmer coming up with that kind of a question. So I used to always tell this example to the other guys. Look, this is what you should be doing. Do your job well, but try and understand the client's business. That's again, adds dimensions to everyone's knowledge, and it did definitely for me. And playing various roles, right? So moving from technology to project management, program management, then moving to architecture, doing consulting, and going up to sales, right? So as I said, I was fortunate to kind of go through the whole gamut. I think each stage kind of gives you a lot of learning. I really was kind of fortunate to be able to learn a lot and tell others.
That's a very interesting way of looking at your experience. So my second question to you was, you said you also got pretty deep into DB2 programming and into performance tuning. Typically, performance tuning and performance engineering is a experimental methodical process where you define what characteristics you hope to achieve, you run the experiment, you see how the system is responding, and also try to identify parameters that could influence performance. It's a cycle by itself. It's not something that can necessarily happen overnight, but you have to be thinking of it and building it into your system. I find that the focus on this discipline somewhat diluted and diminishing, and today seems to be the domain only of large companies who in some sense can afford to do a performance tuning or an assessment. And looking at the amount of data that's coming into the world today, what are your thoughts on managing data and building a system for performance? How can the two come together?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting one. You're absolutely right. I think people kind of tend to, skip certain critical steps and with increasingly, we're looking at a world which is crunching timelines, and so nothing against agile. I think agile is great, getting more to market faster so that you're able to test things in the market. I think those are great things, but it should not be at the cost of ignoring a solid foundation for these. So if you're building a large application which is mission critical, and especially client facing ones, you got to make sure that it's on a strong foundation. So because if foundation is not good, you can't later on change it without very expensive rewrite and so on, right? So even today we see, I think even in India, a large bank, one of the largest in India, I think had a lot of problems with their website, internet banking stuff, right, last year. Not once, but a few times. And I think once it even lasted like a couple of days, if I remember right. So I think you're right. A lot of people actually ignore or give very less importance to the architecture. And when I say architecture, it includes the data aspect also. And as you rightly said, the complexity is only increasing. There's a huge, everybody I think is after the next shiny thing, right? Artificial intelligence, machine learning and all that, big data. Everybody I think is wanting to do stuff, but have they done certain things right? Have they got the foundation right? Then they have the ability to do all that, take advantage of all the new technologies. So everybody talks about customer experience and customer analytics and stuff like that, right? So continuously learning systems, but do they have a resilient platforms, application portfolio in the first place? Because I think today, especially today's context of COVID and all that, businesses resiliency is in question. So it's a lot of businesses are really struggling. I think the ones which are in a good place will be those businesses which are not only resilient in the sense that they have a strong business model, they have a strong financial model, they don't have a client concentration in a few clients or a few geographies, they're well diversified, but also from a technology perspective they have a strong foundation. Do they have a resilient system, right? So will they be able to, so suddenly everybody is moving from offline to online mode across industries. So do you have systems which are capable of doing it, or are you going to just wake up today and start looking at the architecture and the data aspects, right? So I think that's extremely important. I think while most of the companies, irrespective of the size, I would say do have an architect, it is being done as something which is kind of a necessary evil rather than something where they should be giving a lot more attention to it. Also, it is not just the architect's job, right? I think it's the developers need to understand what are the architecture principles, what are the drivers behind it. They got to adhere to the best practices. So, which is why the well-run companies which have a well-oiled IT engine running, they have, in a very decentralized way, adopted best practices. They have a way of governing these things, right? So, whenever any new initiative is started, they have things kind of, from a reuse perspective, right? So you don't want to have people to kind of start on a clean slate. And so again, people are all, nobody has time. So you got to have a strong foundation, which is easily accessible for people, usable. So I think, this goes to how you have designed your applications, how many common services are there, how many are reusable. I think this whole API economy we have today, microservices and all that, so these are new terms. I think these best practices, they have been around for many years, right? So people used to call it a service-oriented architecture before, or component-based architecture, and today we call it microservices. So I think the principles are the same, but people just don't follow it. I think that's where people need to be conscious about these best practices and imbue it as part of their day-to-day work, right? It should not be done as a standalone exercise. Coming to performance testing, again, if you have a solid architecture, much of your performance testing in terms of validating that architecture should have happened upfront. So shift left, as they say, even in the testing context, right? So testing a functionality, you got to have shift left. So that, how well the application meets business functionality should be checked well upfront in the software development lifecycle. Same thing applies to performance. So once you have an architecture in place and a bare minimum viable product in place, that's actually the time to validate the architecture, kind of simulate the data and so on. So there is a best practices which actually says that your development environment, staging and production should not be varying too much, in the sense that you don't want to defer the decisions or the impact of a bad architecture to later. So I think today we are in a very good position. So cloud technologies are available. You just buy what you need when you need. I think it's very easy to create a development environment that simulates that's similar to a production environment. I think some of these critical activities need to be done upfront.
Thanks, Ramki. That was a very systemic response to a very systemic problem. I want to go back a little bit, to your previous part of the conversation that we were having. And you said that the financial services industry is something that has really interested you. So the first question was more of a curiosity question that came to my mind. When you talk about a design mindset, to me, it somewhat seems counterintuitive in a financial industry where processes and the way things are done are pretty set. And I may be wrong here, but curious, how does the whole aspect of designing a service play out in the financial services industry? And what is it about this industry that's fascinated you?
I think financial services have been in the forefront of using technology for a long time. And in fact, I think if I'm not wrong, pioneers, so whether it is experimenting with new technology, new methodologies, new tools, or even offshoring for that matter, right? So totally different, completely drastic execution models, right? So I think financial services have been in the forefront, and maybe the fact that I've kind of worked with them early on is part of my love for that industry, because even in my the last large company I worked with, we used to, across industries, so I used to head the financial services industry, and across industries financial services used to get the maximum number of client visits. We do track how many clients are visiting, what is the agenda, what is the outcome, how many opportunities came out of it, and so on, right? So what we see is with financial services clients, they typically are in the forefront, right? So whether it is trying out a new technology or when it comes to processes. So I personally have not seen them being inflexible, right? So banks, of course, are very large, right? So when I say financial services, I include banking, the capital market firms, the broker dealers, etc., right, and the insurance firms. So within that set, I've seen the capital markets guys used to be much more risk-taking. Of course, their business is risky. They also take a lot of risks. So any new technology gives them an edge in the marketplace. And then next comes banking. Even though most of the banks I work with are very large ones, when it comes to technology, again, they want to use everything that's out there to because there's a lot of cutthroat competition, right? Take any geography, US or UK or Europe, India. I think it's a very competitive marketplace, financial services. So they got to be on top of technology, keep experimenting. And again, processes, when it comes to IT processes. Insurance, I would say has been a third one. Typically, insurance, even if you look at the legacy world, I think large insurance firms still have a lot of legacy, though they have been a bit slower compared to the other two in terms of moving to new technology. But I think that's changing now a lot. Even in the context of India, I think insurance firms have gone to the regulator with a lot of new ideas, right? So everybody is seriously looking at how to use AI, ML, and things like that. I just feel that they are just completely immersed themselves in technology. I think probably you can say financial services has been unique in my experience, where technology has been central to business. So if you take a manufacturing, that's technology doesn't come to your mind first, right? Again, retail, same way. Typically, if you take a large retail firm, the biggest IT systems you will see will be the ERP and CRM, right? So traditionally, they don't haven't been kind of going beyond that. So this is basically taking care of your core processes, right? But that's changing, of course, across industries. I think digital is changing everything. But with financial services, I've just seen that they're just completely immersed in technology, and technology takes a front seat, right? So I think CIOs in the financial services world typically find a seat in the board. Of course, I have not seen too many CIOs going on to run companies, except it's, of course, if it's a technology company by itself. But I think technologies has been playing a very central role in financial services. Processes wise, they have been improving, right? I think even if you look at BPM tools, financial services companies were among the first to start using BPM tools to look at process automation, right, in a big way. So, and even BPO deals, so whether it is mortgage outsourcing or whatever, all of them wanted to not just outsource the same mess, but they wanted to look at how can I use technology to automate certain areas, right? Of course, I think the experience could vary. The larger, well-run ones have been using technology from a services, process and services perspective in a flexible way. It probably also goes with how fast a company has been able to move away from a technology debt, legacy. Large banks still are using, in fact, some banks I know, even broker dealers, when the Wall Street, I think they still probably are on old mid-range Unix systems written in some very arcane languages. So you're right. So those areas, they do struggle with changing it for the new world, right? But that's where I think we have the opportunity to kind of help them with the digital transformation. So I think it's a mixed bag. It's not bad because I think they have had to change with the times, because given fintech, kind of is a big threat, and banks are in an advantageous position in the sense that they have the customer data. They still are the regulated entity, whereas usually the fintechs are not unless they have a banking license. So they have necessarily have had to become flexible in their IT. They need to be in a position to kind of API is their whole functionality, at least be in a position to participate in the digital ecosystem, right? So I think they are getting there. It's a struggle, but it's also an opportunity.
Nice, Ramki. Lots and lots of points and topics that are coming to my mind for future conversations, but maybe in the context of digital transformation, or who knows, maybe even a special on the financial sector itself.
Okay, sure. I would love to, yeah.
So my next question is, you've moved through so many roles in your career. What were each one of those transitions like, and what were some of your takeaways from each of those transitions? Why did you take on so many different kinds of roles?
Yeah, interesting question, Chitra. So I think some of it given to me as something which I could take up. Some of it I really jumped at it. Some of them I asked and took some roles. Some were thrust on me. So I think it's a mixed bag. Like you can't have everything your way, right? But I'm really counting my blessings. So been fortunate to get to do all these roles, and I really when I meet younger guys, I tell them that don't be shy of experimenting to different roles, right? So I think there is always this tug of war between do you specialize or generalize. I think the earlier in your career you want to specialize. As you go along, you want to generalize. But I think today's world has changed quite a bit. So people who are generalists are seen to be having less value. If you're a specialist and you happen to have the right kind of skills and knowledge, I think you're in the right place. So I think these things will keep changing. But for somebody to kind of keep both, right? So having, being passionate in a particular area and keep developing your skills and knowledge, I think is extremely essential today. You got to be a specialist in a few areas. And at the same time, you got to have a general view of things. So I think it's always good to play a client relationship and a sales role, because typically you don't want to be on one side always. You got to be thinking from the other side. Then you do a much better job on what you do on the other side, right? While being on the corporate IT world side, one of the things that people used to tell me is, Ramki, I think, you've done various things, but I think, you always seem to be very conservative in your way of thinking. You don't take risks, right? So even though it was late in my career, I kind of decided that I will take some risks. Let me see how it goes. So I put up my own money, and along with another colleague of mine who kind of had a similar thoughts. So we kind of brainstormed and started upon our own. So that was a big risk actually I took, but I think everything teaches us a lot of things, right? Nothing like running a startup. Kind of do pretty much every role, even though you call yourself as a founder, but you pretty much, you got to build a platform. You got to do code reviews. You got to work with the developers. You got to, prepare the marketing material. You got to go and meet the clients, the prospects, keep building a sales funnel. do everything manually, right? So as they say, when you're not there yet, you're doing things in a completely non-scalable way, right? So everything you're doing by yourself, and a lot of things are done from the scratch. So I did that, and I don't regret any of it. I think everything teaches you a lot. And again, meeting clients is something, as I said, I kind of enjoy. There's a lot of struggle as you kind of build a business, bring it up. I think it's every time I go and try and sell an idea at my platform to a prospective client, it energizes me, because I think meeting people and kind of helping them realize that they have a undiscovered need, here is a new solution, and they agree with you that there is value, right? I think that gives you some joy and fulfillment. So I think each stage of my career, I've kind of been fortunate to be on a continuous learning mode. Of course, I take a lot of opportunities to meet people and tell them, share my experience so that they benefit from it. I think that's something which is, again, essential, right? So, and a lot of times, as I do that, concepts get reinforced in my mind. Questions keep coming up. As I tell people something, I realize, is this the way I should have done, or should I have looked at something else, right? So I think these are things which keep our mind growing. I think that's very critical.
You covered a lot of aspects there, and certainly I have a lot of takeaways for sure. And in fact, it segues very nicely into the next question I have. You mentioned throughout this conversation several times about the importance of interacting with clients, and the fact that I sense you've probably picked up a lot of the opportunities that came your way to actually put yourself out there and talk to them. And you also said that it energizes you, it motivates you. What are some of your biggest takeaways from having interacted with clients? Why are they so important?
There's a lot involved in preparing before we go and meet a client. So extremely important. So I do a lot of research in terms of who is the client I'm meeting, what is their background, what particular needs do they have. So I think the meeting itself, I consider it successful in my mind if I'm able to at least give some value to the client. So the client is obviously taking his time away from something else to meet with me. I got to make sure that one, the client has key takeaways from the meeting, so they have learned something which they don't know. And secondly, I try to establish the emotional connect with them. So I think ultimately at the end of the day, it's a human-to-human interaction. So we got to know about them. So so typically that's why whenever I get an opportunity, I try not to get into the sales mode in the first meeting. So it's all about getting to know both the sides. A lot of times you may not get that opportunity, so they are there for a given time, and you got to be very subtle about these things. But I think at the end of the day, you got to make sure that you're well prepared for the meeting. I think that's important. Secondly, you got to know what are their wants and needs, right? So I think that's extremely easy to say, but a lot of times clients actually come with something in their mind, and if you don't touch on that, that can be extremely irritating for them. So you got to make sure that you tick some of those boxes. That's extremely critical, right? So you got to know what is the client looking for. You've got to get those boxes ticked. On top of it, if you're able to kind of make the client think on certain things which they really haven't thought about, that's where actually they remember you, actually, right? So the next time they meet you, they remember that. So who knows, some of these might actually give not only new opportunities, but clients also today work with multiple vendors. So invariably we see clients comparing, right? They go and meet 2 or 3 vendors. They typically do, and I shouldn't say typically, they always rank the vendors at the end of their meetings, and the ones that stand out have gone beyond what they were looking for, right? So they've kind of been pleasantly surprised. They get full value from the time that they spent with you. In larger companies I worked with, we had a team which was focusing pretty much on this, right? So I think there used to be something called a client briefing center, where we had people who kind of do this coordination ahead of time. They collect some intelligence. Then there is a team which is responsible for kind of taking care of drafting the agenda, running with it. you got to be very clear about what you want accomplished, right? And of course, these 1 hour meetings are so difficult. Some meetings can be a day. Those throw a different kind of challenge. You got to make sure that the client is not bored, but completely engaged for the whole day with you. This is actually also goes to, in some ways, design thinking actually, because it's all about empathy. So look at it from the client's perspective. What value they are looking at from that time that they're spending with us. Make sure that they get that, and we go beyond, right? So there is a lot of coordination involved, a lot of thinking. You got to make sure that you're bringing the right expertise in front of the clients. So all this was a little bit easier with the larger firms, but when I was running my own firm, I got to do everything myself. So it kind of was tough, but it was interesting all the same. So not every time it goes well. So we always have those misses. Some client visits just don't go well. Some clients actually are prejudiced. So they've seen something, they want to go with a vendor, they made up their mind, they come to you after seeing somebody else. Irrespective of how well you do, maybe it doesn't crack the ice with them. So I think at the end of the day, the majority of it, so maybe 80-20 rule, right? So have you got most of it right? That's how you grow your business, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of nugget of information over there with respect to how to deal with clients or even approach them. In fact, throughout the last 10 minutes of this conversation, you've moved in and out of with several comparisons with respect to your corporate life as well as your entrepreneurial experience. That brings up my next question to you. As an entrepreneur, what are some of your learnings that you can share along this transition from, let's say, corporate life, where a lot of things you have a support structure behind you, but as an entrepreneur, then you're doing everything by yourself. How did you make that transition, and what are some of the learnings that you can share with our listeners?
I think there are a lot of learnings. By no means I would call my entrepreneurial stint a success. We kind of were bootstrapped. We ran out of money before we got the client traction. We still are alive. We are in a kind of a pivotal stage where we are yet to decide which way to go. But essentially, when we started out, we debated a lot on, I think funding is one key question. So this is in no particular order. I'm just saying whatever comes to my mind first in terms of learning. I think there is one of the decisions is do you put in your own money or you go for external funding. I think there are pros and cons with both. We went with bootstrapping. We could have gone with external funding. So that's something which I think there are no right answers there. If you go with external funding, the advantages are that you have somebody who is not only footing the bill, but can open doors for you potentially. Obviously, not everybody can do that. Today, a lot of people are angel investors. Even they do provide contacts, but I think as you deal with more sophisticated investors, they can open a lot of doors for you. I think that's a very probably the biggest advantage. So I think in terms of testing the market, everybody talks about minimum viable product. I think that's clearly a best practices. So in our own case, we did do our initial research before jumping into actually even putting together a team. We did a lot of research. We came up with the idea. We talked to a few well-wishers, clients. We prepared a wireframe, so meaning just the UI, right? So I think UI conveys a lot in terms of what you're trying to tell the client in terms of what value they can get out of this platform. So we did a wireframe 2 months, and because there was a lot of functionality actually we had in our mind, and we showed it to some of our initial prospective clients, and then we went on to build. So I think we went about it the right way. Just that one of the things we think we could have done differently is the platform we had in mind. One of the key differentiators, competitive differentiators we had in our mind was the richness of functionality. A lot of functionality, we kind of brought it together. They were interconnected. And we felt that, getting a product to the marketplace with all that functionality, or at least most of it, was critical as a competitive differentiator. But what that also did was it prolonged the development time frame. So that's a downside of it. So if we could go back in time and change something, that strategy is probably something, which I would relook at. Thirdly, I think who you're partnering with is also critical. So I did have initially, I started out with two people, and then one stuck on with me, the other one dropped off because he was doing something else as well, and his heart and mind were not in this. So I know that this is a cliched advice people give, but I think it's critical who you're kind of going with initially. It's definitely a better idea not to go just by yourself. And of course, we went to the private limited company, which anyway needs at least 2 directors. We went with 3 initially, but then came down to 2. I think it's important who you are going with. I think initially shared ideas are important, but it's also the shared commitment is very critical. It need not be money. I think money is a good commitment level, kind of very demonstrable, very concrete. But sweat equity is also okay. But I think that initial commitment, should be there. I think that's very critical. I think these are the ones which come to my mind readily. I think I want to also go back to that funding part on one more dimension. In terms of the market that you're kind of looking at, so we were actually looking at only India market, and that too, looking at 1 or 2 cities was our initial focus. We didn't want to spend a lot of money on travel and salespeople and things like that. So I think that's where again external funding could have been a better choice, because while of course any startup typically the founders play the sales role, I think it depends on what you're building and who you're selling it to. The market that you choose is extremely critical thing. Certain markets you need to have money to invest on the sales side, right? So because the more markets you explore, I think the better chances of success you have. So especially when you're trying to create a niche, the value in terms of what customers see, if it's in a completely new area, then you should expect certain resistance and inertia. And it very much depends on what industry you're talking about, what market you're talking about. You need time on your hand, which means you got to have money on your hand, right? So I think those are all the things I would say are big learnings, Chitra.
Thanks, Ramki. Certainly looking at a lot of what you've spoken in this conversation in terms of future podcasts, in terms of future sharing, in fact, maybe a client playbook of some sort, tips and tricks for entrepreneurs to ride the stormy wave. What would you like to leave in terms of a few messages as we wind down this conversation?
Okay, so I think you got to be serious and passionate about a few things, what you do. I think that's important, right? I think today's generation does it well. I don't think we got to tell that to people, but I think at the same time, developing a broader perspective and sense for things, I think that's important. I think that's one thing which, again, looking back at my career, one of the things I've been very grateful about is, while some of the roles have given me the opportunity to do big thinking, a lot of other roles are even in the same role I've had to get down to nitty-gritties, right? So I think this is a bridging the total 30,000 feet to down to the ground level. So that's something I think that's a very useful skill to have, and I would actually kind of urge people to develop that, which is again going back to jumping on opportunities to kind of play a different roles. It kind of really opens up your mind. I think you got to have that big thinking. At the same time, you should be on the ground doing things rather than just doing thinking, right? So got to be actually doing stuff. I think people will be very successful if they are able to balance and do both and kind of bridge these two.
Thank you, Ramki. It's been a wonderful conversation with you.
Thanks, Chitra. I think the questions were very interesting and kind of made me think as well. Thank you.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Malavika for promoting the Software People Stories.
If you like this episode,
please subscribe on your favorite podcast client
and spread the word in your network.
If you'd like to share your story,
contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.